If you've ever tried finding a place to rent in a big city, you know that it can be a bit of a nightmare. Go online and you'll see dingy basement apartments that cost more than a mortgage payment and rooms for rent that look more like someone's living room. Last year, a woman in Toronto went viral after she tried renting out half of her own bed for $900 a month. But the most horrific rental story of all time might belong to Tabatha Pope. In the summer of 2021, Pope and her boyfriend were living in a cheap motel, struggling to make ends meet. And then they found an apartment on West Clay Street, just outside Houston, Texas. It seemed like Pope's luck was finally turning around. She was wrong. In a feature for New York Magazine, Frisch recounts the surreal story of Tabatha Pope and her nightmare on West Clay Street. I'm Kathleen Goldhar, and this is Crime Story. So let's start with Tabatha. Tell me a bit about who she was. She was like sort of in a place where things weren't going great for her, right? Where this story begins.
Yeah, Tabatha is kind of emblematic of Americans who live on the margins. And for her, she was just in a rough patch, living out of a motel with her boyfriend after being evicted from a long-term apartment she had previously. And she was pretty desperate.
I mean, just quickly, like these motels, I mean, there was one place where she lived, right, where the police logged 14 crimes a day.
Yeah, and these places, you're paying $30 a day, but these aren't nice places. The place that she stayed in the summer before she moved to West Clay Street, a guy got shot in the parking lot, but they're cheap enough for someone like her where she can go out, make $30, doing whatever she can, and come back and still have a roof over her head for the next day. But it promotes this sort of hand-to-mouth type of lifestyle, and it's really hard to get out of that hole once you find yourself within it.
So tell me about what she found. I mean, it seems as though when she saw this ad for West Clay Street for the apartment, it might have actually been sort of, like you said, it was more than just like the idea of finding a place to live. This really, for her, felt like a chance to move out of the situation that was kind of keeping her in that place.
Yeah, I think it held two promises. One was logistical, a nice place to live that wasn't in a motel that was known for its crime rate. But the other part was philosophical, as you say, where she's like, this could be the first step towards the life that I really want. But, obviously, too, the price tag played a big factor in that. Places to live aren't cheap in America, especially a big city like Houston. I mean, in Houston, the median rent had gone up by like over 20% over the past 5 years, outpacing traditional minimum wage, outpacing a lot of wages. Even people who make decent money have a hard time paying rent. So for her to find a place that was $600 a month was like a godsend. I mean, she felt like she was winning the lottery.
And what was advertised? Tell me about what was advertised and tell me about sort of the initial sort of viewing of it.
So the gist of the apartment was that the landlord, a woman named Pamela Merritt, had told Tabatha, and Tabatha got put in touch with her through a mutual acquaintance, word on the street, kind of coming down the vine, like, hey, this woman, Pamela Merritt, owns a multifamily home in Houston, which is quite common for Houston, where it's a single structure, but there's multiple apartments within it. And the gist of the offer was, if you rent one of the units and you help clean up the other units so I can rent them out, I'll give you a discount and you can only pay $600 a month to live here. And Tabatha was psyched because she had experience doing handy woman work. Her and her boyfriend Will, that's how they made money. So Tabatha thought, this is perfect for me. I can obtain the discount by doing this work. I don't mind doing the work, and I get a roof over my head. And my boyfriend Will and I are going to be in a great place. And hopefully, by having this stability in my life, I'll be able to then climb the ladder back to where I was 5-6 years ago before things started getting tough.
And what was Pamela Merritt like? That was the woman that she thought owned the home and was going to manage all of this.
Right. So at first glance, Pam seemed kind of cool. I mean, they had a similar kind of sense of dress. Pam was like maybe a little punky, and, she had like ripped jeans and Doc Marten boots and, had colorful hair, just like Tabatha. Tabatha had some purple and pink in her hair. And she was like, oh, like she seemed like a cool chick, like someone I would get along with just normally. And Tabatha felt that this woman, Pamela, was quite kind in extending her this offer.
So when Tabatha first moved into the house, what was it like?
So when she first moved in, only one apartment was habitable. And the gist that Pam had told her was that her and her boyfriend, Michael Brown, who lived there together, they were going to leave the house for a couple weeks. So they show up. Pam says, hey, Michael and I are going to bail for a couple weeks. But when we come back, we'll move into this unit. And then by then, you'll have the second floor ready to go.
Okay, so she moves in and everything seems relatively normal at first. But there are some signs that things are a little bit off, right?
So this story kind of has a drip, drip, drip. So Tabatha gets on the second floor cleaning project pretty quick, within a couple weeks. And she's cleaning the second floor. And it's trashed. I mean, these units really did need a good overhaul. And as she's cleaning, she comes across a few Rubbermaid buckets. And they look to be filled with blood, kind of a watery red liquid. But Pam had preempted this. When she told Tabatha about the second floor, she said, oh, there was some spoiled meat in the fridge and it's going to smell bad. And, we had to put the meat in the bins and blah, 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 right? But Tabatha's looking at this liquid and she's kind of suspicious. Like, it doesn't really make much sense. I don't see any meat in here. All I see is what looks like 3 inches of rich, red, coagulated blood. But Tabatha, being a kind, empathetic person, and this is kind of her own personal philosophical journey, is that she always sees or tries to see the good in others and see the good in the world. So she's like kind of in denial. But she still wants to press Pam. So she's talking about the house, and then Pam's like, well, I don't technically own it. It was this guy named Colin, but he disappeared. So now I'm taking over the house. And Tabatha is a little befuddled. She's like, who the hell is Colin and what happened to him?
So she finds the blood and she's sort of not letting herself think about it being anything but what Pam told her it was. But you said it's sort of like this drip, drip, drip. So what happens over the next little while that makes her think, maybe I need to sort of not be as kind to Pam as I thought I needed to be?
Well, Tabatha really didn't want to believe at first what to any normal person would seem obvious. But she quickly realized, am I being tricked here? Am I being catfished by someone who had something to do with the disappearance of this man named Colin? And things only got worse in this regard when she started cleaning the third floor. And on the third floor, she found on the mattress a large blood stain. And she found blood spatters on the walls, drips of blood in the bathroom. I mean, the clues just started stacking up. So Tabatha presses again. Pam changes her story. Oh yeah, Colin actually fell on a spike and he bled out in the apartment, but we brought him to the hospital and he died. So he's actually dead. He didn't just disappear. And now Tabatha, the alarm bells are going off. And during this time too, Tabatha did call the police. And she thought, the cops will come and they'll take care of it and I'll be safe. But obviously we know that that was not the case either.
Like the cops kind of ignored her, right?
They did. One of the most remarkable aspects of this story was Tabatha's initial interactions with the police, because they show up And Tabatha tells them, this looks like human blood. I'm hearing conflicting stories from my quote-unquote landlord, Pamela Merritt, who is not really my landlord and may have murdered the real landlord. I don't know. You're the police. Please help me. Police look around. They see the buckets full of blood. They see the mattress. And during this time, too, Tabatha had found a bloody knife hidden in the mailbox. And she tells them about the bloody knife. And the reaction from the police was really quite muted. During this visit, they took pictures. They called the homicide division. And the homicide division reported back, no body, no crime. And Tabatha is like, yo, like, I could give you like what could be a murder weapon and you don't want to take it. And the patrol officers were like, no, don't worry about the knife. They never took the knife. And Tabatha knew from being poor in America that her socioeconomic status was a direct influence on how the police treated her in that moment. And after they left, she knew that she was all alone. And she knew that it was up to her to solve this murder. And she knew that she was likely bunking up with an alleged murderer.
So that's where the story for me is. I'm like, I kept having these alternating images of that movie Scream, where it's sort of like a satire on a horror movie. And then, because I'm like, are you the girl that doesn't run? Because you should be running. Why the hell is she staying in this house? I mean, the first time I find a bucket of blood, I'm going to leave.
And that was a huge point of contention for me as a reporter, but also between my editor and I. Because my editor was like, Ian, you have to understand that when readers get to this point, we have to kind of understand Tabatha in a more deep-seated way to understand her motivations for staying, because any normal person would just bail.
Yeah.
And this is where like the kind of reporting process for me became more interesting, because I came to understand Tabatha on a very deep level. And that's why I spent a year working on this story, because I really felt like this was the most crucial part. And so much of it was rooted, I think, in her inability, but potentially unwillingness to ask for help. Her mother still lived in Texas. Her mother always told her, you could always come back home. But when someone like Tabatha, who's been beaten down by society, is seen crawling back to mom, you're not only admitting that you can't make it on your own, but you're admitting that the world got the best of you, right? And I really feel like that was a huge factor in Tabatha's dedication almost to staying. But again, as I mentioned earlier, she wears her heart on her sleeve. She has always empathized with the less fortunate. She has always looked out for people who have less than. And for her, she saw Colin as the ultimate embodiment of all of these things, all of these intangible things that she sees in the world and she experiences herself. And I think that she told herself that if I can't best the world, if I can't overcome the unforgiving nature of society, I can at least do this one thing for this one person and make sure that I see this murder mystery through to the end.
So she's staying. What are her interactions with Pamela like? What's happening then?
Well, her interactions with Pam become a little delicate, because Tabatha is almost playing this sort of spy game now. How much does Pam know? How should I act in relationship to how much I think she knows? It's like she's playing a game of poker, right? So she just wants to play it cool. That's Tabatha's plan. I can play it cool. I can let them talk. I can kind of do my thing. And hopefully they will slip up and spill more information about what happened to Colin. So Pam was living there as well with her boyfriend, Michael Brown. But Michael, he becomes a little bit of a pawn in this too because he is weaker than Pam. You can tell that their power dynamic is that Pam is the boss and Michael is the submissive. So Tabatha, as she comes to realize that she's pretty much alone in doing her DIY detective efforts, starts to lean on Michael for information. And all the while as well, Tabatha is like scouring the house for evidence. So she gets a 3-ring binder. She's compiling evidence. She finds like personal artifacts from Colin, puts them in the binder. She's taking pictures on her phone and backing them up to an SD card. And she finds like some really creepy evidence, including in Pam's closet, a note that said, "Thanks, friend. Sorry for killing." And Tabatha is like, this just doesn't stop. Like, this is crazy. Like, I can't believe the police won't help me. But again, at that point, as she's compiled this evidence, she has a clear theory as to what happened here. She really needs to lean on Pam and Mike to reveal more information so she can use that as leverage to get the police back in the picture. And she finally gets to the point where she has that opportunity. And the climax of the story, comes into focus.
Because she finds sort of the ultimate evidence, right?
She does.
If we can call it that.
She discovers the corpse of Colin Kardashian in the backyard underneath the second-story porch. And it's kind of strange and lends itself to the kind of characters that she is dealing with here, in that Tabatha didn't just stumble upon it. Pam Merritt showed it to her. So Tabatha doesn't have a car. So Pam and Mike were going to the grocery store, and Tabatha's like, well, I'll tag along. She definitely felt unsafe getting in the car with them, but she thought that by her showcasing her comfortability with them, they might slip up. And they did in that conversation that they had when they all drove to the grocery store together. Pam and Mike were chatting about the dead dog underneath the back staircase, like whispering to each other, like, what are we going to do about the dead dog? And Tabatha's in the back seat, like straining to hear. And Tabatha kind of clocks it, and she's like, okay. She waits. They get back to the house, and Tabatha's like, hey, Pam, what was that you were saying about the dead dog? Like, what's going on there? Pam's like, oh, you want to see it? Walks to the backyard. Tabatha is about to crouch down to look underneath the porch, and Tabatha quickly thinks, is this a setup? Is Pam going to bludgeon me on the back of the head?
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? So Tabatha is looking over her shoulder, and she leans down and she pulls back the chicken wire, and she looks in the darkness, and there's a human body there. Clearly a human body that had been decomposing for months. So Tabatha holds her composure and runs into her apartment and locks the door. Tabatha knows, if I call 911 and start screaming at the top of my lungs, there's a dead body, my landlord's not really my landlord, she catfished me and she killed the real landlord, and help me. What if Pam hears her make that phone call? What is she going to do? So Tabatha sneaks out of the house and she hustles down to the Houston Police Department precinct, and she tells the desk sergeant, I think that there's a dead human body underneath my back staircase, and here's pictures. Like, can you see? Like, 'cause she took pictures of the body, and the desk sergeant says, you have to call it in. And Tabatha's like, I don't know what that means. I'm here. And they were like, we can't take a complaint like this in person. You have to, actually pick up your phone and call the station. And Tabatha is like, I can't go back to this house. And she's on the verge of breaking down at this point. This is the second time the police wouldn't help her. And she feels utterly alone, but the stakes have risen dramatically because now she knows a murder has taken place in this house. And she has no idea how Pam or Mike will react. She goes back to the house, locks herself in her apartment, and strategizes again. What do I do? The desk sergeant gave her a non-emergency phone number to call. She calls that a bunch of times. She's placed on hold for an hour. It's not going to work. as she's trying to call, she sees a police cruiser drive by her house. So she sneaks out of the house, hustles down the street. The cop had pulled over at the next intersection, and she knocks on his window. And she saw the look on his face. She saw the look on his face. He scanned her up and down, looked at her, made a judgment. Tabatha tells him, I think there's a dead body at this house I'm renting, and I need help. And the guy in the cop car says, you have to call it in. I can't help you.
What is that?
I don't know. And as a reporter, I was like, I almost didn't believe Tabatha at first because it just seemed so outlandish. And I tried to ask Houston Police Department if this was like just policy of some kind, like, I don't know, like chain of custody of evidence where like when you call it in, it's recorded and then they can use that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Never got a straight answer. It seems absurd. So after the guy in the cruiser told her that I'm not going to help you, you have to call it in, she finally went home and called 911 and just said, I'm not calling the non-emergency line. I'm not messing around. I'm going to call 911. So she called 911 and they sent out a whole team, crime scene unit, homicide detectives, medical examiner, the whole 9 yards. And they discovered the body. They processed the scene. Tabatha wasn't super impressed with how they treated her. They made her sit in the back of the cop car the whole time, and they weren't really warm to her as if she was a victim. They were pretty judgmental, and maybe for good reason, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Especially that early in an investigation. They don't know. But again, like if you look at the history of what Tabatha's been trying to do over the past 3-4 months, you might treat her a little bit differently. But Tabatha told the whole theory, gave him all the evidence that she compiled, like told him everything. They take the body away.
She has a binder.
Hours. Yeah, she has a binder.
She has a binder, yeah.
So they take the evidence, they take her witness statement, and after they take the body away, they bring Pam and Mike down to the precinct for questioning, like interrogation room style, not just like on the curb, like, hey, what's your side of the story? Like they really took it seriously what Tabatha said. So Tabatha's like, oh my God, thank you. Like finally, you're going to arrest the killers and like, I'm safe and this whole saga's over. So Tabatha goes back into the house after the police had left. Took like about 6 hours, I think, to take the body away and process the scene. And then a little bit later, she hears the door open and she peeks out and Pam and Mike are back in the house. They were not charged with a crime. They were not detained or arrested. They were let go. And now Tabatha is like, what the hell is going on? Now Tabatha is really freaked out because she snitched on Pam and Mike. They found the body. They've been interrogated. Now Tabatha is like, what's going to happen? And how quickly are the cops going to act to arrest this person? Because now I'm in danger. Maybe she would kill me to make all this stop. Maybe she would kill the only witness.
How long does this go on before there's anything else that happens?
It took the police 18 months to arrest Pam, over 18 months.
And Tabatha and Pam lived together for 18 months?
So after the body was found, Tabatha basically realized that the money that she was paying Pam was not going towards the mortgage. It was not going towards utilities. Pam was just stealing the money.
Yeah.
So a few months after the body was found, the power was turned off and the house went into foreclosure and Pam and Mike just bailed and they left Tabatha there. But during that time, the time between the bodies found and Pam and Mike leave the house, it was a pretty touchy situation where Tabatha would barricade her door every night. She would try her best to avoid Pam and Mike. And a few nights, Pam tried to bash her door in with a 2x4 in the middle of the night. And Tabatha didn't know if this was directly related to Tabatha finding the body, calling the cops, yada, 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 because Pam would just rant about random stuff and be blaming Tabatha. And again, this falls back on my kind of suspicion that maybe Pam is bipolar, has schizophrenia, something going on.
And it also reiterates your idea about how stuck Tabatha was. I mean, seriously, now her physical safety is at risk.
Of course. And at this point, too, Tabatha had been living in the house with her boyfriend, Will. I mentioned him at the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
But Will had his own demons, and Tabatha ended up breaking up with him, and Will had left earlier in this narrative, right around the time the body was found. So now Tabatha's alone. So after Pam and Mike left, Tabatha, whose career prospects, I will say, were tied with Will, because Will was the guy, her boyfriend, who had the hookups for the construction job, and she would make money almost through him. Now, on her own, she had an even harder time making income, so she ended up just basically staying in the West Clay Street house after the power got shut off, after Pam and Mike left, and she was just squatting there, saving money, biding her time. But also, she said, I kind of wanted to be in the house in case anyone needed to find me. If the cops or anyone needed to find me, I really wanted to be there. And this actually proved to be true, because Colin Kardashi's son, Nathan, after hearing on the news that a body was found at this address where his dad presumably lived, they were estranged, but other relatives were calling him because he also lived in Texas. Nathan went to the house and found Tabatha there. She tells him everything, and she had kept a lot of Colin's personal artifacts that weren't directly related to the crime. So she gave Nathan a family photo album and all this stuff, this sentimental stuff, that gave it to Nathan. And Nathan was just like, who are you? Like, this is crazy. Yeah. So Nathan was like, I'm going to do everything I can to get some resolution on the case. You should do everything you can, and you and I can keep in touch, right? But again, super slow moving. It took the medical examiner's office in Houston, 7+ months to even identify the body as Colin. They can't really do anything unless they know who the person who was killed is. So they identified the body. They did the autopsy. They confirmed he was stabbed to death, like the whole 9 yards, right? And then they arrested Pam. But this was 18 months after the body was discovered that Pam was arrested, and Tabatha wasn't even given a heads up, and no one really knew. Tabatha only saw that Pam was arrested when she saw it on the local news. And she told me that when she saw that Pam was arrested, she jumped. She was like, oh my God, this saga is finally over.
And what happens to Pamela? Is she in prison still, I'm assuming?
So Pam currently is in jail awaiting trial or awaiting her opportunity to plead guilty. She decides to go to trial, Tabatha will have to testify. Yeah. So that is something that, Tabatha was very weary of. And she was like, I really hope I don't have to go. Like, it's such a traumatic experience. But she said to me, if Pam wants to go to trial, I will do the right thing, and I will show up, and I will tell my story for Colin.
How is Tabatha? Where is she now? You're obviously keeping up with her.
The thing about the ending of this story is that I wanted to show that even if you do an heroic thing, even if you show the world that you can fight back, that you can right a wrong, that you can help one person in the most intimate way possible, the world still will not reciprocate. So after Tabatha left West Clay Street, she went and lived in a different home with a woman where she rented a room and was, again, going to get a discount to help around the house. That fell through. And then she ended up living in a van on a friend's property and was also living in their garage. And the garage burned down.
Oh.
So then she moves into the van on their property, and she's living in a van in a friend's backyard, but she's saving her money because she wants to build a tiny home atop a trailer, and she wants to hook it up to a truck and drive away. And I asked her where she wanted to go, and she's like, I'm not sure yet. The world is a pretty big place.
Well, thank you, Ian, for bringing us the story. It really is one heck of a story.
Oh, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
You've been listening to Crime Story from CBC Podcasts. We release a new episode every Monday, so please remember to follow the show in your podcast app. You can get our next episode a week early on CBC Podcasts' YouTube channel or by subscribing to CBC Podcasts' True Crime channel on Apple Podcasts. In addition to early access, subscribers to our True Crime channel also listen ad-free. Crime Story is hosted by me, Kathleen Goldhar. Our producers are Nikki Manfredi and Mitchell Stewart. Sound design by Julian Uzielli and Mitchell Stewart. Our senior producer is Jeff Turner, our video producer is Evan Agard, and our YouTube producer is John Lee. Executive producers are Cecil Fernandez and Chris Oak. Tanya Springer is the senior manager of CBC Podcasts, and Arif Noorani is the director of CBC Podcasts.